Hi, this is Bob. Today's 10-minute tour is going to be on the Accounts Payable AP Settings screen. We'll go through each of the screens and try and describe what actions are made there. Year-ending date is a date that's set when you first set up software and increments every year as you close AP for the year. That date is used to decide what buckets to put invoices in, whether they're, invoice amounts in, whether they're going to be in the prior year, current year, or future year, next year, buckets. The same is true for the 1099 year ending date. Once you close the 1099 year, it will increment 1 year and then move all the buckets around so that this year becomes last year, next year becomes this year, and next year is at 0 till you start adding stuff to it. Pending system allows you to limit payment of invoices until somebody has approved the invoice. So they go in as pending. You can use it as a single user, not used, or single user, multiple user, or not used. To be honest, I should change this to not used because we don't really use this part of the software anymore. But I'm going to leave it here for right now so that you can see where you set up other stuff related to that. Use approval system is another item we used to use, we no longer do. We use TimberScan now, and it has its own approval system. So if you use a third-party software like that, you're probably fine without needing these approvals set up. But invoice approval settings would allow you to display invoice level, whether they're approved or unapproved, and then what distribution information to show for those invoices. And it gives you a place to go in and basically you approve an invoice, or an individual goes in and approves an invoice. So if you've got an AP, a bunch of AP clerks entering invoices, but only the AP manager can approve them, this is what you'd set up for that AP manager to go in and approve those invoices. There again, we don't use it, but retain 1099 totals per GL prefix. I actually use that in a related company we had where we have multiple businesses set up under one corporate umbrella. And we wanted to have 1099s go out from Company A, Company B, and Company C, even though the corporate entity was controlling them all. So you have to check that, and there's a few other spots you've got to set to allow you to do 1099s by that prefix. So if your prefix 1 is Company A, it would send a 1099 to that vendor from Company A instead of sending one from the combined A, B, and C total. Include historical invoices in file and verification. We used to have that checked. And one of the things we'd do is if we had an invoice without a number on it, we'd use a date. So, today is April 4th, or excuse me, April 8th of 20. So we would use like 04/08/2020 as the invoice number. The problem was we started running into real invoices that had the number 04/08/2020, and you couldn't put them into AP. And so we realized that was an issue for us, so we no longer use that historical invoice file for verification. It still checks the current file, is my understanding. So if you are going to duplicate an invoice, as long as they're fairly recent, where it really would be a duplicate invoice, it should catch it. Post and interface settings, we generally have all of them on automatic. If you have control concerns, you could set them to manual so that a supervisor would have to post those invoices and review the printouts for them. But normally we have all these set to automatic. The only time you'd check any of these different would be if you're calling into Timberline's support and they need you to shut something off so they can fix an error. Invoice settings are going to allow you to set controls for invoice dates, discount dates, accounting dates, and so on. So discount usage we put at the invoice level. If you don't ever use discounts, if you never take advantage of payment discounts, you could set it to not used. We do it at an invoice level, meaning each invoice would have a discount date. Distribution level would mean each line item would have a discount date. That's not normally very typical. Miscellaneous deduction usage, we don't use that. Same idea, you could set it to those other levels. If you do, then you'd have an option in here to go in and set further settings for it. Tax usage, we really should set ours to not tracked. We contemplated using it more than we actually ever did. A good reason to use this would be if you I'm going to forget the term that they use, but basically where you don't pay taxes on anything you buy, but you pay them as a use tax in whole. So you track all your taxes and pay them as a use tax instead of paying a sales tax. That's where that would be helpful. Tax settings allows you to tell it where you're going to put that discount, or that tax, excuse me. Date received usage. We don't require to put in a date when the invoice is received. Our TimberScan system tracks that pretty well already with when it gets entered. And most of our invoices get entered the day they come in. But you can require date received. It helps in arguments where somebody says you haven't paid an invoice and it's now 60 days old, and you look and you see I only got it 10 days ago. Payment date usage, we mark ours required. That means we always put in a date when that invoice is due. It doesn't mean you have to pay it by then, and it's not the date that it is paid, it's just the assumed payment date. Accounting date usage, if you use an invoice date, if the month's already closed, you have a problem. Although I think you can override it. The date it's received is usually pretty good, but sometimes we get stuff, you get an invoice, say on the 3rd for the prior month. You want that to apply back to when the actual material was delivered or whatever. So we usually mark ours entered. That way we enter that date for every invoice. Calculate discount and payment dates based on the invoice date. So we usually do that. Distribution settings allows you to set for different classes of vendors what you want to see on the screen. So like for an equipment vendor, I want to see equipment information. For a summary vendor, I only need the job cost info. I think there's GL probably down here somewhere, description. But it allows you so you can get different vendors or vendor types that show different information. Warning messages. So this warns when you're over limit, when the invoice exceeds the commitment, when the invoice exceeds the estimate. We put that to no message because they always seem to overrun that. Unapproved submittal for job. Enable unapproved submittal for job. So that means we don't have the submittal approved yet, but we want it to show that. And you can put tolerances in there if you want to refine it. And if you have any questions, obviously the help here will take you in and tell you a little bit about what that box is used for. Additional settings, you can add extra boxes and so on. We started out with a voucher system, so we had that in there. We no longer use that, but we still have it pop up all the time. Payment settings. This allows you to set up for micro printing. You can decide whether to assign one or more to checks, so we can run checks out of 3 or 4 different bank accounts if you needed to. And we have ours set to system for the system to automatically assign it per distribution. So you could have each job have a different one. And we have our last check number update based on quick checks, not on manual checks, because we actually have 2 different series of numbers. If you used one continuous series of checks, you'd want the manual check updates to update the last one also. And that gives you several different journals that exist that you could select to use to print when you do your accounts payable program. Enable trust accounting. I had to look that one up and I have already forgotten it, but allows you to print checks and tasks, generate electronic payments. You got to have that checked. Trust accounting laws prevent the use of funds from one company to pay the invoices of another. The trust accounting feature in accounts payable verifies that sufficient funds are available for the company in a valid bank account before checks print. So it won't let you print checks that you don't have money for. And I'm at 11 minutes, so I'm going to call this the end of today's 10-minute tour. I'll pick it up again tomorrow.